The first thing I remember my mother ever saying about Grandma Dorothy was that she was a woman who had made her choices. I was 8 years old. We were walking away from her apartment building on a Sunday afternoon in late November, the kind of cold that gets into your coat before you finish buttoning it. I remember looking back at the building, 3 floors of dark brick, the kind that absorbs light instead of reflecting it, and seeing a shape in the 3rd floor window. Grandma Dorothy standing behind the curtain, watching us leave. I stopped walking. My mother's hand closed around mine and pulled me forward without breaking her stride. "Don't feel sorry for her," Calandra said. "She made her own bed a long time ago." I didn't say anything. I was 8, and I had learned already that asking questions in my family was less like opening a door and more like knocking on a wall. You did it, you felt the solid resistance, and you walked away with nothing but sore knuckles. But I kept thinking about it on the drive home. She made her own bed. I turned the phrase over and over in my mind the way you turn a stone, looking for something underneath. What bed had Grandma Dorothy made? And why did my mother say it like she was reading a verdict that had already been decided? I never found out. My mother wasn't the explaining type. She was the type who expected understanding to arrive through proximity, like warmth from a radiator. If you stood close enough, long enough, eventually it would reach you. What she didn't account for was that some of us were standing in the wrong room entirely. My name is Ismarie Hensley, and this is the story of the year my grandmother was left at my door on Christmas Eve, the year I learned what it means to stay when everyone else has already decided to leave, and the year I found out that the people who keep the quietest sometimes have the most to say. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please stay with me until the end. There is a particular kind of family that looks completely normal from the outside. Sunday dinners, Christmas cards with everyone smiling, a father who coaches Little League one season and then stops but never explains why. A mother who volunteers at the school fundraiser and brings the best brownies and never lets anyone forget it. The Hensley family was that kind of family. Braxley Hensley, my father, was a good man in the way that a comfortable chair is good. Reliable, present, not demanding. He worked in municipal planning, came home at the same time every evening, read the paper at the kitchen table, and loved my mother in the quiet, steady way of a man who has decided that keeping the peace is the same thing as keeping a marriage. In many ways, he was right. In the ways that mattered to me, he was wrong. Calandra Hensley, my mother, was the engine of our household. She organized, decided, managed, and directed with the efficiency of someone who genuinely believes that if they stop moving, everything will fall apart. And maybe she was right about that too. She had a gift for seeing what needed to be done and doing it, a quality I admired and feared in equal measure because it left very little room for anything that couldn't be categorized as useful. And then there was Orrin. Orrin Hensley was 3 years older than me and had the particular gift of occupying space in a way that made everyone around him feel like supporting cast. Not because he was cruel. Cruelty would have been easier to hold on to. He was simply magnetic, in that effortless way that some people are, the way sunlight through a window is warm without trying. Teachers liked him, coaches liked him, parents of other kids liked him. Our parents, it went without saying, adored him. He got the bedroom with the window seat. I got the one next to the water heater, which clanked every 40 minutes throughout the night like something trying to get out. I used to lie awake counting the intervals, wondering if I could predict exactly when the next one would come. I got very good at it. I learned a lot about waiting for things you know are coming but can't stop. Orrin got piano lessons starting at age 7. When my mother mentioned, only once, I'll give her that, the possibility of lessons for me, my father said, she doesn't really have the hands for it. And that was the end of that. I was 9. I didn't know what hands for piano were supposed to look like. I looked at mine for a long time after that conversation, trying to figure out what was wrong with them. When Orrin got into the state university on a partial athletic scholarship, my parents threw him a party. There was a banner, there were balloons, blue and gold, the school colors. My mother made his favorite cake, lemon with cream cheese frosting, and invited 20 people. I stood in the kitchen doorway, eating a piece off a paper plate, and watched my father put his arm around Orrin's shoulders and say, loud enough for everyone to hear, "That's my son." 2 years later, when I received a full scholarship to the nursing program at the regional college, my mother said, "Well, that's practical." She said it the way you'd say, the weather held up or the traffic wasn't bad. A fact, an acceptable outcome, nothing to get excited about. I told myself it didn't hurt. I was 17 and I was getting better at that particular lie. I want to be clear about something because I know how this part sounds. I was not a martyr. I didn't walk around with the quiet, suffering face of someone waiting to be noticed. I had friends. I had a life. I was, by most measures, fine. But I want you to understand the texture of fine in my family. Fine meant no one was fighting. Fine meant the machinery was running. Fine meant that when Calandra looked around the table at dinner and did her internal inventory of problems to solve, I didn't register as a problem. I had learned, early and efficiently, how to not be a problem. The trouble with not being a problem is that it's very close, structurally, to not being seen. I started nursing school in late August, right at the turn from summer to fall. The campus was 40 minutes from home, close enough that commuting made more financial sense than dorming. I didn't mind. I liked the program, I liked the clinical work, the precision of it, the way there was always something concrete to do, a blood pressure to take, a chart to update, a patient who needed their pillow adjusted and was genuinely grateful when you did it. I was good at noticing what people needed. I had been practicing my whole life. I was halfway through my second year when my father had his first heart surgery. It wasn't catastrophic. A blocked artery, caught early. The surgeon said he'd done 3 of these already that week. But the recovery was slow, and the deductible was not small, and my mother called me on a Thursday evening with that particular careful voice she used when she needed something from me and was framing it as information. "Your father's procedure is scheduled for the 14th, she said. "The insurance will cover most of it." Most of it was doing a lot of work in that sentence. I waited. "There's a gap," she said. "We'll manage, of course. We always do." "How much is the gap?" she told me. I did the math in my head. I had been doing that kind of math since I was old enough to understand what a budget was. "I can cover it," I said. "Ismarie, you don't have to." "I can cover it." There was a pause. Not the pause of someone about to argue. The pause of someone accepting something they had already decided to accept before they made the call. "You're very practical," my mother said. Not thank you, not I love you. Practical. I withdrew from the nursing program the following Monday. I told myself it was temporary. A semester off, maybe 2, just until things stabilized. I was 20, I had time, the program would be there when I came back. I never went back. I got a job waitressing at a steakhouse off the interstate. The kind of place where the booths are red vinyl and the portions are large and the tips are decent on weekends if you work the right section. I got a second job doing data entry for a chiropractic office that paid in cash, which helped with taxes in ways I chose not to examine too closely. I moved into a studio apartment in a building on the east side of the city, 4 flights up because the elevator was unreliable, with windows that looked out onto the back of a parking garage. The building smelled like cigarette smoke and old ambitions on every floor. I got used to it. You get used to most things, given enough time. For 4 years after that, I existed in my family the way a piece of furniture exists in a room that's been rearranged, still technically present, but no longer in the arrangement anyone is paying attention to. I showed up for Thanksgiving when Calandra guilted me into it. I sent Christmas cards with my name signed at the bottom. When Oren got engaged to Stephanie, whose parents owned 2 car dealerships and a vacation property in the Outer Banks, I attended the engagement party and stood near the appetizer table and told people I worked in healthcare administration, which was close enough to true that I didn't feel bad about it. No one asked many questions. People rarely do about the ones who are managing. Here is what I knew about Grandma Dorothy Calloway before that Thanksgiving when I was 23. She had lived in the same 3-story brownstone for 40 years, the one with the 3rd floor window I remembered from childhood. The building had a garden in the back where she grew tomatoes every summer, big, impractical heirloom varieties in colors that looked painted. My grandfather Walter had bought the building before my mother was born and paid it off before he died of a slow-moving cancer when I was 11. Dorothy had kept the whole building as rental income until the upper floors needed too many repairs, and then she'd converted it to a single-family residence and lived in it alone. She was 69 years old that Thanksgiving. Trim, upright, with silver hair, she wore short and dark eyes that missed very little. She had Walter's stubbornness, my mother always said, as though stubbornness were a defect that could be inherited like a tendency toward high blood pressure. I had not seen her in almost 2 years. That was my fault partly. Or rather, it was the fault of geography and scheduling and the general entropy of families where no one is actively trying to stay connected. I had meant to visit. I had thought about it, meaning to do a thing and thinking about doing a thing are the most comfortable substitutes for actually doing it, and I had been comfortable in that substitution for longer than I wanted to admit. The Thanksgiving dinner itself was unremarkable. Calandra had made the turkey and 4 side dishes and a pie and had also, somehow, reorganized the linen closet and confirmed Oren's promotion at the financial consulting firm where he'd worked since graduating. Braxley sat at the head of the table looking quietly grateful for everything without specifying what exactly. Oren and Stephanie talked about the wedding timeline. I refilled water glasses when they got low and mostly listened. It was in the hallway after dinner when I was on my way to find my coat that I stopped. The kitchen door was not fully closed. The voices were my father's and my Uncle Garrett's. Or rather, it was Dorothy's younger brother, Garrett Calloway, which is something I need to explain. Garrett was not my mother's brother. He was Dorothy's younger brother by 9 years. Born when Dorothy was already in high school, which meant he was 58 to her 69. He had always been part of our family gatherings the way certain weather systems are part of certain regions. Expected, somewhat ominous, and difficult to avoid without leaving the area entirely. He was a businessman of the kind that generates impressive vocabulary around ordinary deals, a man whose confidence always ran slightly ahead of his results. I stood in the hallway and listened. She signed everything over last month, and Garrett's voice had that practice ease of someone delivering news they've already decided is good. Took some convincing, but she understood it was the right thing. And you're sure the investment is solid? My father's voice was careful. Braxley was not a skeptical man by nature, but there was something in his tone, a thread of doubt he was trying not to pull. Sunbelt real estate development. I've got the partners lined up, permits in process. 2 years, maybe 3, and we triple her money. Then she buys somewhere nicer, warmer, better for her joints. And if the permits don't, they'll come through. Richard, Braxley, have I ever steered this family wrong? I heard my father not answer, which was its own kind of answer. The market timing is perfect, Garrett continued. She's getting older. The maintenance on that building alone, she'd be better off liquid. This is the smart move. My mother came around the corner and found me standing in the hallway with my coat half buttoned. Is Mary, why are you lurking? I was, help me with the dessert plates. I helped with the dessert plates. I didn't ask about the house. I had learned by then that asking questions in my family had consequences that rarely matched the information gained. You broke something or you got assigned the task of fixing it, and either way, you were worse off than before. But I thought about it on the drive home. She signed everything over. The brownstone, the building Walter had bought and paid off, the one solid thing Dorothy had. 6 months later, through the particular grapevine of family news that operates entirely in half sentences and changed subjects, I heard that Garrett had lost everything. Not just Dorothy's money, his partner's money, other investors' money. The permits had fallen through. The market had shifted in ways Garrett's confidence had failed to account for. And the legal fees that followed had consumed whatever remained. The details were kept deliberately vague at family gatherings. People stopped mentioning Garrett's projects the way you stop mentioning the name of someone who has died in an embarrassing way. Dorothy moved into a 1-bedroom rental apartment across town. Nobody talked about that either. I visited her that fall, on a Saturday afternoon without telling anyone I was going. I brought a box of pastries from the bakery on Clement Street, the one she'd taken me to twice as a child and that I'd looked up the week before to make sure it was still there. The apartment was on the 2nd floor of a beige stucco building with a parking lot in the front where the garden should have been. Clean hallways, adequate lighting, the particular dignity of a space that has been made the best of. Dorothy opened the door and looked at me with the expression of someone recalibrating quickly. Is Mary. A pause. Your mother didn't mention she doesn't know I'm here. Something moved across her face. Brief, unclassifiable. Then she stepped back and let me in. The apartment was clean but bare in a way that felt deliberate rather than sparse. None of the photographs I remembered from the brownstone, none of the furniture. Just a couch, a television, a small table by the window that caught the afternoon light. A shelf with a few books, a single African violet on the kitchen sill, purple and stubborn. We sat at the table and ate pastries and talked about the weather, my job, a documentary series she'd been watching about national parks. She didn't mention the brownstone. She didn't mention Garrett. Neither did I. The not mentioning sat between us like a third person at the table, taking up space, not eating anything. When I stood to leave, she caught my hand at the door. Her grip was light, not weak, just economical. The grip of someone who has stopped spending energy on things that don't require it. You're a good girl, Ismarie, she said. You always were. I didn't know what to do with that. I nodded, said goodbye, and walked down the hallway and out into the fall afternoon. I sat in my car for a few minutes before starting it, looking at the beige stucco building. I thought about calling her more often, visiting again before another 2 years passed, taking her to that bakery myself instead of just bringing the box. I thought about it. I told myself I would. I was 23. I still believed that meaning to was close enough to doing. Grandma Dorothy had her stroke on a Thursday morning in mid-March, 1 week before the first day of spring. I know the exact date because I have gone back to it many times since, the way you go back to the last page you remember reading before you lost the book, trying to reconstruct what came before, what came after, what you missed while you were looking somewhere else. She was found by a woman named Carol Merritt, a retired schoolteacher who volunteered for Meals on Wheels 3 mornings a week. Carol had been delivering to Dorothy for 4 months by then. She knew the schedule. She knew that Dorothy always came to the door within 30 seconds of a knock. When the knock went unanswered, Carol waited, knocked again, waited again, and then called the building manager. The emergency contact on Dorothy's file at the hospital was not my mother. It was not Garrett. It was not anyone named Calloway or Hensley. It was Carol Merritt. Dorothy had removed all family members from her emergency contacts. The hospital records showed she had done this quietly and completely, without explanation, 2 years before the stroke. The doctors described the damage carefully. There had been a bleed in the left hemisphere, the language hemisphere. Dorothy had survived, was conscious, was responding to stimuli and simple commands, but the area that controlled speech production had been affected. She had not spoken since they found her. Whether she would speak again, to what degree, with what recovery, was genuinely uncertain. These things take time, the neurologist told us, and sometimes they take more time than we'd like. Sometimes the pathways find alternate routes. Sometimes they don't. We monitor, we support, we wait. My mother called me 3 days after Dorothy was admitted. 3 days. I was on my way into a lunch shift at the steakhouse when my phone rang. I sat down on the low wall outside the entrance and listened to Calandra explain the situation in the careful voice she used when something was very simple and she simply didn't want to deal with it. The important thing, she said, after covering the medical facts with brisk efficiency, is sorting out the practical matters. There was that word again. Practical. I'll be there tomorrow, I said. The hospital hallway smelled like industrial cleaner and recirculated air. I found my family assembled outside Dorothy's room like a committee that had already voted on something and was waiting for the minutes to be filed. Braxley, Calandra, Garrett, who had driven up from 2 hours south and was wearing the particular expression of a man trying to look more concerned than calculating. Orrin, standing with his hands in his pockets in the way he stood when he was present but not fully engaged. Stephanie slightly behind him, thumb moving across her phone screen. She can't live alone, Braxley was saying as I walked up. That's clear. Then we find a facility, Calandra said. A good one. With what? Garrett's voice had an edge in it. She has Social Security and a small pension. Between them, they barely cover her medications. There's nothing left for private care. I was still holding my coat because no one had offered to take it. Someone takes her in, I said, temporarily while we sort out the longer-term options. Everyone looked at me in the way that people look at someone who has volunteered for something they didn't fully think through. Calandra's face did the thing it did when she was managing competing emotions. The slight tightening around the eyes, the mouth held carefully neutral. Ismeri, that's generous, but you work full-time, and your apartment is a studio? Yes, but I'm there most nights and I can adjust my schedule. I can take the early morning shift at the clinic and keep evenings more flexible. The silence that followed was not thoughtful. It was calculating, in the way of people running arithmetic in their heads. Garrett recovered first. That could work, just until the Medicaid application processes. These things take time, but once she's in the system, I haven't agreed to anything permanent, I said. Of course not. His smile was practiced warmth over something harder. Just temporary. The family appreciates it, Ismarie. We really do. My mother was already nodding in the particular way she nodded when a decision had been made that she was relieved not to have made herself. I went into Dorothy's room while they were still talking. She was lying in the hospital bed with her eyes open, looking at the ceiling with an expression I couldn't read. The monitors beeped softly. The afternoon light came in flat and institutional through the window. I pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. Hey, Grandma, it's me. It's Ismeri. She turned her head, slowly, like someone recalibrating direction. Her eyes found mine. They were clear, more present than I'd expected, focused in a way that the word stroke victim hadn't prepared me for. She was in there, fully, watching me. She didn't speak. "I'm going to take care of you for a while," I said, "until we figure out what comes next. Is that okay?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached out her hand from the edge of the bed, a deliberate movement, measured, not accidental. I took it. Her grip was weak compared to what I remembered from her doorway 2 years ago, but it was there. It was decided. 3 weeks passed. In those 3 weeks, I reorganized my work schedule, cleared a corner of my studio that I generously called a bedroom, ordered an elevated twin mattress from an online retailer that promised same-day delivery and delivered it 3 days late, and called the Medicaid office 4 times to be told each time that the application was processing and that processing took time, and that there was nothing to be done to speed processing. I also did not hear from Garrett about a specific date or a transition plan or anything resembling a handoff protocol. When I called my mother to ask, she said she'd passed the message along. When I called again, she said she thought Garrett was handling it. On the evening of December 24th, I came home from a 4-hour lunch shift at the steakhouse. The restaurant had been full of office parties and family gatherings, the particular chaos of people who are celebrating and in a hurry simultaneously. I smelled like a combination of béarnaise sauce and other people's good cheer. I was wearing my uniform, black pants, white shirt with the steakhouse logo on the breast pocket. I was thinking about a shower and approximately 10 hours of sleep. I opened the door to my building and nearly walked into Garrett Calloway. He was standing on the front step in an expensive overcoat, breath visible in the cold December air. Behind him, sitting in a rental car at the curb with the engine running, was Dorothy, visible through the passenger window, her silver hair and her composed expression that gave nothing away. On the sidewalk beside Garrett, 2 suitcases, medium-sized, neither of them new. Snow was beginning to fall. Light, preliminary, the kind that isn't sure yet if it's committed to the idea. "Garrett," I started. "Merry Christmas." He said it the way people say "sign here," a pleasantry attached to a transaction. "She's all set. Prescriptions are in the side pocket of the blue bag. Pharmacy has everything on file. She likes tea in the morning. 2 sugars, not 1. She's particular about it." "Wait." I looked at the car, at Dorothy sitting motionless in the passenger seat. I thought there was going to be a transition period. I thought we were going to... We talked about this, Ismarie. The family agreed. Temporary arrangement. He was already moving, opening the passenger door of the rental car, helping Dorothy out with the practiced efficiency of someone completing a task rather than caring for a person. He did not meet her eyes. He did not speak to her directly. He got her to standing, pointed her gently in my direction, and then stepped back. He did not say goodbye to her. He picked up the 2 suitcases and set them on the sidewalk beside me. "You need anything else, call your mother." He was already walking back around to the driver's side. "You're doing a good thing here. The family appreciates it." The car door closed. The engine revved slightly. The headlights swept across the front of the building as he pulled away. And then it was just me and Dorothy on the sidewalk in the snow on Christmas Eve. She was standing very straight, the way she always stood, her coat buttoned to the collar, a small purse held in both hands in front of her. She looked at me, then she looked at the building, then she looked back at me, and something happened on her face. Not quite a smile, not yet, but the precursor to one. A slight softening. The expression of someone who has assessed a situation and found it, if not ideal, at least honest. I picked up both suitcases. "Let me show you the elevator," I said. "It smells terrible, but it works most of the time." She fell into step beside me toward the door. Inside the building's small foyer, waiting for the elevator, I felt her fingers close lightly around my wrist. Not urgent, just present. I looked down. She was watching the elevator doors. With one finger, slowly, she traced 3 letters on the back of my hand. I-O-K. I thought she was telling me she was okay. I almost said, "I know," but something in the deliberateness of the gesture stopped me. She traced it again, looked up at me. I nodded, not understanding, filing it away. The elevator arrived. It smelled, as advertised, like decades of other people's habits. We rode up together in silence. I thought, I have no idea what I'm doing. But then I thought about the grip of her hand in the hospital, the deliberate way she had reached out and held on. Neither does she, I thought, and she did it anyway. The elevator stopped, the doors opened, I carried both suitcases down the hall to my apartment, and I opened the door and I let us both in. Outside, the snow kept falling. The first month was survival. I have no more elegant way to describe it. It was the stripped down business of learning how to keep two people functional in 500 square feet, on a schedule that required me to be in two places before most people had finished their first cup of coffee. I moved my bed against the wall and angled it so that Dorothy's elevated mattress, positioned by the window, had a clear line of sight to both the door and the small television. She liked watching the street below. I noticed this early, the way her gaze drifted to the window more than the screen, the slight easing of her posture when there was movement outside to observe. People, cars, the man who walked a large, uncoordinated dog every morning at 7:15. She watched all of it with the focused attention of someone who has recently been reminded that the ordinary world is worth paying attention to. I worked mornings at the chiropractic clinic. I had negotiated a schedule shift, earlier start, earlier finish, and evenings at the steakhouse on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. On the mornings I was home, I handled Dorothy's medications, which required a system because there were 6 of them and 3 had to be taken with food and 1 had to be taken 45 minutes before food, and the timing mattered in ways the pharmacy paperwork explained in small print that I read 3 times. I put medication reminders on my phone. I created a written chart and taped it inside the kitchen cabinet. I bought a weekly pill organizer in a color Dorothy could identify without her reading glasses. I learned that she preferred her eggs scrambled soft rather than firm, that she wanted the volume on the television at 17 and not 18, and that she had a strong and non-negotiable opinion about the kind of tea I was buying, which was not the right kind. The right kind, I found after 2 failed attempts, was a specific loose-leaf English breakfast blend from a shop 4 blocks away. I bought a tin of it. She held it in both hands and examined the label in the particular way of someone confirming an old acquaintance. The doctors had said her speech might recover, might partially recover, might not recover. The word might was doing the work of 3 different outcomes simultaneously. My family heard the least hopeful interpretation and adjusted their attention accordingly, which is to say, they largely stopped paying attention. But I watched her, and what I saw from the very first week was this. Dorothy was not confused. She was not diminished. She followed conversations on the television news with visible engagement, shaking her head at certain stories, nodding at others, occasionally directing at the screen an expression of such concentrated skepticism that I found myself looking to see what she was reacting to. When I told her about a conflict with the new manager at the steakhouse, a man who seemed to believe that condescension was a management style, she rolled her eyes in a way so precisely calibrated to the story that I laughed out loud at the kitchen counter. She understood everything. She simply could not produce the words. What emerged instead over those first weeks was something I did not anticipate. A language. Not a formal system, nothing I planned or designed. It evolved the way useful things evolve, through repetition and necessity and the particular intelligence of 2 people who need to understand each other and are willing to work for it. 1 tap on a surface. I need your attention. 3 taps, bathroom. 2 taps, water. 1 long press. I'm tired. I need to rest. A flat palm held up. Stop. Wait. A slight tilt of the head to the right. I disagree. Within 3 weeks, we were having conversations that would have looked, to an outside observer, like one person talking and another person responding in a private code, which was, I suppose, exactly what it was. My mother called twice in January. Both calls were logistical. Had I contacted the social services office about the Medicaid application? Did I need a copy of the medical power of attorney paperwork that, and here she paused in a way that I recognized as the pause before a statement she hadn't fully thought through, that we should probably get sorted out at some point? She's settling in, I said. We're figuring it out. Good. Calandra's voice had the slightly distracted quality it got when she was multitasking. Garrett's been asking about some paperwork, by the way. Something from your grandfather's estate. An old account he thinks your grandmother may have documents for. If you come across anything in her things, just let us know. What kind of documents? I don't know the details exactly. I didn't look. I wasn't going through Dorothy's 2 suitcases for Garrett's benefit, and the fact that my mother delivered the request so casually, as though rifling through your grandmother's belongings on behalf of the uncle who had already lost her house once was simply a reasonable thing to ask, told me more than any explanation would have. I told the social worker, Sandra Oakes, who came for her first monthly check-in in mid-January and would become, over the following months, one of the most quietly useful people in my life, that I had no information about any estate documents and that any inquiries of that nature should go through Dorothy's own attorney if she had one. I didn't know yet whether she had one, but it seemed like the right thing to say. Dorothy was sitting in her chair by the window during this conversation. When Sandra left and the door closed, Dorothy tapped once on the arm of the chair. I looked at her. She held up one finger, pointed at me. Then she placed her hand flat against her own chest and nodded, slow and deliberate, the way you nod when you are confirming something you've decided. I stood there in my kitchen, still wearing my coat. "Okay," I said, "because what else do you say when a woman who cannot speak looks at you that way?" She dropped her hand, turned back to the window. Outside, the man with the uncoordinated dog was making his 7:15 appearance. We had been together for exactly 3 weeks. I thought, I don't know what any of this means yet, and also, I think I'm going to find out. It was a slow Tuesday in late February when I first noticed it. The chiropractic clinic had 2 patients cancel back to back, which left me sitting at the front desk with a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm and 40 minutes of nothing in particular to do. I did what I always did in those moments. I opened my banking app and looked at the numbers in the way you look at something you already know but feel compelled to verify anyway. The balance in my checking account was what it was. The balance in my savings was what it always was, which was not much. And then I saw it. A deposit. $900. Posted 3 days earlier while I'd been too busy to look carefully. The description field said only, transfer. REF 0029-WCT. No sender name, no account name, nothing that told me anything about where it had come from or why it had arrived. I set down my coffee and looked at it for a long time. My first thought was that it was a bank error. Someone's accountant had transposed a digit and somewhere a confused recipient was waiting for money that had landed in my account by mistake. This happened. I had read about it happening. I put the money mentally in a holding category labeled not mine yet and went back to work. 3 days later, I called the bank. 22 minutes on hold, then a customer service representative named Tyler who was helpful in the way that people are helpful when they cannot actually help. He confirmed that yes, the transfer had occurred, and yes, it had come from an external account at a different institution. And no, he could not tell me anything more specific than the routing number, which I wrote down on the back of an appointment card. I spent an evening trying to trace the routing number online. It belonged to a small regional bank in the Midwest, a genuine institution, FDIC insured, nothing suspicious in its basic profile. But it had no online portal I could access, no public account lookup, no way for a private individual to determine whose account had sent money from it. I gave up and put the $900 in a separate savings account I labeled, with grim practicality, return if necessary. The following month, $900 more. Same routing number, same sparse description. And the month after that, by the 4th month, the return if necessary account had $3,600 in it, and Dorothy's primary care physician had just informed me that her blood pressure medication, the specific formulation that had been working, that had taken 3 months of trial and adjustment to get right, was no longer covered at the same tier by her insurance plan. The new out-of-pocket cost was $112 a month. The steakhouse had cut my Thursday shift because the new manager, a man named Davis, who wore his authority like a new coat he hadn't broken in yet, had decided to restructure the evening schedule in ways that consistently disadvantaged the staff he'd inherited from the previous manager. I transferred $200 from the return if necessary account to cover the medication gap. I told myself it was a loan. That when whoever this was came looking for their money, I would pay it back with interest and an apology. I told myself I was being practical. The money kept coming. I kept using it, carefully, only for Dorothy. Her medications, her physical therapy copays, the specific tea from the shop 4 blocks away, a better reading lamp for her corner of the room because the overhead light was giving her headaches. I kept every receipt. I kept a running log of every dollar I spent from that account and what it paid for. If someone was going to come looking, I wanted to be able to account for every cent. What I did not do, for a long time, was consider the possibility that the someone sending this money already knew exactly where it was going. I met Eli Sutton on a Wednesday afternoon in early April, standing in line at the pharmacy 4 blocks from my apartment. I had been there twice already that week. The insurance company had decided, in its infinite and impersonal wisdom, that the dosage of Dorothy's blood pressure medication that her doctor had prescribed was outside standard protocol, which meant that every refill required a prior authorization, which meant that every refill involved a phone call, which meant that every refill took 3 to 5 business days longer than it should have, which meant that I had become a regular enough presence at the pharmacy counter that the technician, a young woman named Bex, greeted me with the specific expression of someone who is sympathetic to your situation and genuinely sorry that sympathy is all she has to offer. I was standing at the back of the pickup line looking at the ceiling when I said, not really to anyone in particular, "They always do this." The rejection loop. The voice came from the man standing one place ahead of me in the line, who turned slightly as he said it. "My mom's been fighting them 3 months on her blood thinners." He was about my age, maybe a year or two older. Medium height, broad through the shoulders in the way of someone who does physical work rather than gym work. He had a face that was easy to look at, not classically handsome, but the kind of face that seems genuinely at rest, which is rarer than people realize. There was a faint smear of something dark, grease maybe, or oil, near his left wrist that he had not entirely succeeded in scrubbing off. 3 months, I said. That's almost impressive. They've been rejecting Dorothy's for 6. Dorothy's my grandmother. She's living with me. The dosage they'll cover doesn't work as well, and the dosage that works isn't what they consider standard protocol, which apparently means someone in an office building somewhere has decided her specific physiology doesn't count as evidence. He was quiet for a moment. I realized I had said more to this stranger in 30 seconds than I had said to most people I knew in weeks. There was something about the line at the pharmacy, the shared waiting, the shared indignity of it, that dissolved the usual social distances. "That's genuinely maddening," he said. Not "I'm sorry" or "that's rough" or any of the other phrases people use when they want to acknowledge something without engaging with it. Just genuinely maddening. Like he meant it. "Yes," I said. "It is. I'm Eli. Is Mary. You want to get coffee after this? You look like you could use some." I almost said no. I was tired in the deep tissue way of someone who has been running on adrenaline and obligation for months, and the idea of performing the social labor of getting to know you conversation felt like being asked to climb stairs when you are already carrying something heavy. But there was something in his face. Not pity, I want to be clear about that, because pity is its own kind of distance, that was closer to recognition. Like he knew what it looked like to be managing something alone and had decided, for reasons of his own, that he didn't need the full explanation before offering company. "Okay," I said. We got coffee at the diner 2 streets over, the kind with laminate menus and coffee that is hot and strong and does not pretend to be anything else. We talked for an hour. He worked at an automotive repair shop, had been there 6 years, was saving to eventually open his own. His mother had been dealing with her heart condition for 3 years. He drove her to appointments on Wednesdays. He was straightforward in conversation the way that some people are, not blunt, just uninterested in indirection. He said what he meant and listened when you talked and did not look at his phone. A week later, dinner. After that, he started appearing at the steakhouse near the end of my Saturday shifts, sitting at the far end of the bar with a glass of whatever was on draft, reading something on his phone, not demanding anything, just present. He never asked why I couldn't stay out late, never expressed impatience when I said I needed to get home to Dorothy, never performed understanding in the slightly martyred way that some people perform it. He just nodded and walked me to my car and texted later to ask if everything was okay. After the 3rd or 4th time, I explained properly. The stroke, the studio apartment, the 2 suitcases on Christmas Eve, Garrett and his overcoat driving away while the snow started to fall. Eli listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "She sounds tough. Surviving a stroke like that and ending up somewhere that actually feels safe, that's not nothing. She doesn't have a lot of options." "She had options," he said. "You were one of them. Someone chose to make you one of them." I didn't know what to say to that, so I changed the subject. But I thought about it later, in the car on the way home, and then again while I was unlocking my apartment door and hearing Dorothy's television at volume 17 through the wood. Someone chose to make you one of them. Eli started coming over. He learned the tap code within 2 weeks. I explained it once, and he remembered it with the matter-of-fact retention of someone accustomed to learning systems. He started bringing groceries without being asked, just showing up on Sunday afternoons with a canvas bag. Milk, bread, the specific loose-leaf English breakfast tea from the shop 4 blocks away in its distinctive green tin. I had never told him the brand. He must have checked the shelf. One evening in late June, the windows open, the city noise drifting up, Dorothy dozing in her chair while the news played quietly, Eli was at my kitchen sink washing the dinner dishes. He had cooked. pasta with summer vegetables, and a sauce that required no recipe because he had made it so many times that the proportions lived in his hands. It was better than anything I had the energy to make on a weekday, and I had told him so, and he had said, "It's just pasta," in the way that people who are genuinely good at something dismiss their own competence. "You're good with her," I said. He shrugged, hands still in the soapy water. "She's good with me. She patted my face when I came in yesterday." 3 taps? He turned around, eyes wide. 3 taps means bathroom. A pause. She seemed very pleased with herself. She always does. He laughed. A real one. The kind that came up unexpectedly. And I laughed too. And for a moment, the studio apartment felt less like a situation I was managing and more like a life I was actually living. That night, after Eli left, Dorothy caught my eye from her chair. She lifted her hand and placed it flat against her own chest. The gesture I still didn't have a name for. The one she'd used before, the one that seemed older and more deliberate than our invented code. She held it there for a moment, then she closed her eyes. I sat with the meaning of it for a long time after she'd fallen asleep. It was a Saturday morning in mid-September when I found the piece of paper. I was not looking for anything. I want to be clear about this because it matters. I was reorganizing the small nightstand drawer beside Dorothy's bed so that her reading glasses and her hand lotion and her bookmark were within reach without her having to lean, which the physical therapist had asked her not to do while her balance was still inconsistent. I was moving things from one arrangement to a more sensible one. The paper was folded into quarters and tucked under the tray liner. Plain white, the kind that comes from any notepad. On it, in handwriting I recognized as Dorothy's, careful, slightly compressed, the hand of someone who had been taught to write properly and retained the habit, was a name and a phone number. Irving O. Kellner, Esquire 4, 158-830274. I stood there holding it, and then, like something surfacing slowly from deep water, I remembered. The elevator on Christmas Eve. Dorothy tracing 3 letters on the back of my hand with one deliberate finger. I had thought she was telling me she was okay. I had filed it away and not returned to it. I-O-K. Not I'm okay. A name. I looked up from the paper. Dorothy was sitting in her chair by the window, hands folded in her lap. The morning light fell across her in the particular way it did at this hour. Soft, unhurried. She was looking out at the street below, but her shoulders had a slight tension in them that wasn't usually there. The tension of waiting. Is this someone I should call? I held up the paper. She didn't turn around immediately. Then, slowly, she turned her head and looked at me. She raised her right hand and tapped once on the arm of her chair. 1 tap. Yes. I called the number the following morning from the small back room at the chiropractic clinic during my 15-minute break. The phone rang twice before a man answered. Calm, unhurried, with the particular steadiness of someone who has spent decades being the person other people call when things are complicated. Irving Kellner. Mr. Kellner, my name is Ismiri Hensley. I'm Dorothy Calloway's granddaughter. I found your number in her... Miss Hensley. A brief pause that was not surprise, more like the confirmation of something anticipated. Dorothy told me you'd call eventually. She said it might take you a while. She said you weren't the type to go looking through other people's things. I sat down on the edge of the desk. She told you how she hasn't been... She writes, he said simply. Letters. Longhand. She's been writing to me since approximately 6 weeks after she moved in with you. But I never saw the mail. Your mail carrier, a Mr. Delgado, has been very accommodating. Dorothy introduced herself to him about a month after she arrived, apparently. He collects her outgoing letters from a spot she indicated and delivers her incoming ones directly to her. She asked him not to mention it, and he didn't. He strikes me as a man who respects privacy. I thought about Mr. Delgado, who I had exchanged approximately 40 words with over the course of a year, who smiled when he handed me packages and whose name I had learned only because it was on his uniform, who had, apparently, been carrying on a quiet postal arrangement with my mute grandmother for 8 months without once giving anything away. What has she been writing to you about? I asked. I'm not able to share the specifics, Miss Hensley. Attorney-client privilege applies regardless of the medium of communication. His voice was not unkind. What I can tell you is that Dorothy is my client of 32 years, that she has been in communication with me consistently since shortly after her stroke, and that she has asked me to wait until you found this number on your own before making contact. She was very specific about that. Why? A pause. Thoughtful. Careful. I think that's a question she would prefer to answer herself. When the time is right, she'll explain. She's been waiting to do this properly. Another pause. She also wanted me to tell you one thing, if you called before she was ready to speak. What? She said, the tea is fine. I just wanted her to work for it a little. I stayed very still for a moment. Then something cracked open in my chest. Not painfully, just suddenly. And I laughed until my eyes watered, alone in the back room of the chiropractic clinic, with the sounds of the front office drifting through the door. When I got home that evening, Dorothy was at the window with her cup of tea. I sat down across from her. You've been writing letters, I said. Not an accusation, just the fact of it, laid out between us. She didn't react for a moment. Then the corner of her mouth moved, just slightly, just enough. And Mr. Delgado has been your mail carrier. She tapped once. Yes. For 8 months. Another tap. I looked at her, this woman who had sat across from me for 8 months in apparent silence while conducting a quiet, purposeful correspondence with her attorney through the cooperative discretion of a mail carrier I'd barely noticed, who had traced the initials of that attorney on my hand on Christmas Eve and waited patiently to see if I would find my way to understanding what they meant. You planned something, I said. She held my gaze. One tap. Yes. Should I be worried? She shook her head, slowly, once. Then she did the thing she had done before, raised her hand and placed it flat against her chest, held it there, looked at me steadily. Okay, I said. Okay. She turned back to the window. Outside, the September light was going amber. Down the street, a child on a bicycle wobbled heroically through the intersection and made it across. November came in cold and purposeful, the way November does in this city. Not gradually, but all at once, as though it had been waiting just outside the door and finally decided to stop being polite. Calandra texted on a Tuesday evening, "Call me when you have a moment, family matter." I had learned, over the past year, to treat those two words, family matter, the way you treat a weather advisory. Not panic, but preparation. Something was coming. The only question was how much of it would land on me. I waited 3 days before calling back. Not out of pettiness, I want to be clear about that, but because I had 2 morning shifts, a pharmacy dispute to resolve, and Dorothy's monthly appointment with her neurologist, which required a medical transport I had to arrange 48 hours in advance. When I finally called on Friday evening, Calandra answered on the second ring with the alert quickness of someone who had been checking their phone. "Is Mary, I've been trying to reach you." "I've been busy, Mom. I work 2 jobs and I'm caring for an elderly woman full-time. What's the family matter?" A pause, the particular pause of someone organizing language. "The family has been discussing longer-term arrangements for Mother. Garrett has been looking into some options. There's a memory care facility in Scottsdale with an excellent reputation. Private rooms, therapeutic programming. Dorothy doesn't have memory problems. She had a stroke. They're different conditions. The point is that there are professional options, Ismiri. Options that might be better suited to her level of need. Scottsdale is in Arizona. It's a few hours from Garrett. He could visit regularly. Yes." I kept my voice flat. "He hasn't visited once in 11 months, Mom." Silence. "There's also a financial matter," she said, and I heard the slight shift in her tone, the move from opener to actual subject. "Garrett needs to speak with Mother directly about something. An account your grandfather set up years ago. There may be documentation that requires her authorization." I looked across the room. Dorothy was in her chair with a book open on her lap, a paperback mystery she'd been working through for 2 weeks, one of several I'd gotten from the library branch around the corner. Her eyes were on the page, but her hands were very still. "If Garrett needs something from her," I said carefully, "he can come here and ask her himself, in person." "Ismiri, that's my answer, Mom. In person, with me present." I ended the call before she could redirect me. For a long moment, the apartment was quiet except for the sound of the television in the other room, which I had left on at volume 17, and the faint, distant sound of the city going about its Friday evening. Dorothy turned a page of her book. She did not look up, but her hands were no longer still. Garrett arrived on a Thursday evening 16 days after my mother's call. No advance notice. No text, no voicemail, nothing to suggest he was coming until the knock on my door at 7:15, right as I was pulling on my coat for the dinner shift. I had 3 tables booked in the first hour, and Davis had been making pointed comments about punctuality, and I was running exactly on time and couldn't afford not to be. I opened the door, expecting Eli. Garrett Calloway filled the doorway in an overcoat that cost more than my monthly rent. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him, thinner through the face, with an energy under his skin that I had not seen before, something quick and compressed like pressure behind a sealed valve. The Garrett I remembered operated at a kind of expansive ease, the ease of a man who believes the room will adjust to him. This version was adjusting to the room. That was new. Ismeri. He didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped past me into the apartment with the practiced forward motion of someone accustomed to not being stopped, his eyes moving quickly around the space. The small kitchen, the television, the mattress by the window, Dorothy in her chair. "I see you've made do with the space," he said. "Garrett, I'm leaving for work in 4 minutes." "This won't take long." He was already moving toward Dorothy, pulling a folder from his briefcase, thick, heavy with paper, the kind of folder that has been assembled with intent. He set it on the side table beside her chair and stood over her in the way of someone who has decided that standing is an advantage. "Dorothy." He spoke louder than necessary, in the exaggerated way some people speak to those they've decided are impaired, regardless of the evidence. "I need your help with something. It's straightforward. There's an account your father, Walter, set up years ago. The family has been trying to access it for estate purposes, and it requires the account holder's signature. Just a signature, that's all." He spread several pages from the folder across Dorothy's lap and pressed a pen into her right hand. "Garrett." I crossed the room. "What is this?" "Family business." He didn't look at me. "Nothing that concerns you." "She's in my care. Everything that happens in this apartment concerns me." I reached past him and took the papers from Dorothy's lap, stepping between them. "Let me see what you're asking her to sign." He tried to take the papers back. I held on. What I read in the next 30 seconds was not a simple signature line for account access. There were 3 separate documents: a financial power of attorney granting Garrett signatory authority over all of Dorothy's accounts, a request for transfer of an unspecified amount described only as estate funds held in trust, and a third document, the one that made my stomach drop, a pre-filled petition to the county probate court requesting that Garrett Calloway be appointed Dorothy's legal guardian on the grounds of diminished capacity and inability to manage personal affairs. He wasn't just asking for access to a bank account. He was trying to take legal control of her entirely. "This is fraud," I said. The words came out steadier than I expected. "You're trying to get a woman who hasn't spoken in 11 months to sign a guardianship petition without any legal oversight, without her attorney present, without any medical evaluation on record to support a capacity determination." Garrett's face changed. The performance of calm reasonableness dropped away, not all at once, but in sections, like plaster falling from a wall. Underneath was something harder and more honestly itself. "The money in that account has been sitting there for years because Dorothy was too stubborn to set up proper access while she was healthy. Now she can't object in any meaningful way, and the family needs those funds. Bradley, Orrin needs them. He's made some investments that have gone badly, and there are people—" "Orrin gambled with money he didn't have," I said, "and you want to use Dorothy's assets to cover it after you already lost her house." That was a legitimate business opportunity. "You lost her house, Garrett." The door opened behind me. I had not heard the knock. Eli stood in the doorway with a canvas grocery bag in one hand and his keys in the other, reading the room with the quick, calm assessment of someone who is good in unexpected situations. "Everything okay?" he said, to me, not to Garrett. Garrett straightened his jacket. "This is a family matter." "She asked you to leave," Eli said. He stepped inside and set the grocery bag on the kitchen counter, unhurried, and then stood in a way that was simply solid. Not aggressive, not performed, just the physical fact of his presence occupying the space between Garrett and the door. Garrett looked at him, then at me, then, finally, at Dorothy. She was sitting perfectly upright in her chair. She had not moved during the entire exchange. The pen Garrett had pressed into her hand was now sitting on the arm of the chair beside her, placed there deliberately, I realized. Not dropped, set aside. She was looking at Garrett with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Not anger, not fear, something older and more settled than either. The expression of a woman who has been waiting for a long time to see something confirmed, and has just seen it. Garrett picked up his folder, pushed the papers back inside with hands that were not entirely steady. "The money belongs to the family. You can't keep it locked away forever." "I'd like you to leave now," I said. He moved to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame, looked back at us, at me, at Eli, at Dorothy in her chair. "You'll regret involving yourself in things that don't concern you," he said. It was aimed at me, but his eyes went briefly to Eli before he looked away. Then he was gone. Eli closed the door, locked it. The click of the deadbolt was very loud in the sudden quiet. "You okay?" he said. My hands were shaking. I noticed this abstractly, the way you notice details when your body is running on something other than its usual fuel. I tried to pick up my coat from the counter and couldn't get my fingers to close properly around the collar. Not really. I sat down on the edge of the kitchen chair. "I have a shift in 20 minutes. "I know." He picked up my coat and held it out. "I'll stay here with her." From her chair, Dorothy tapped once. "Yes." I looked at her. She pointed at Eli, then at the door he had just come through. Then she placed her hand flat on her chest. The gesture I knew by now, the one with no tap code equivalent because some things don't need a system. "She approves," Eli said quietly. "She does," I said. I put on my coat and went to work. All the way down the stairs and through the cold November night to the steakhouse, I thought about the third document in Garrett's folder. The guardianship petition. The one that said diminished capacity. The one that had been pre-filled and ready to sign. He had come prepared. He had planned this, which meant there was a next move coming. The legal letters began arriving 8 days later. Not from Garrett directly. That would have been too honest, and Garrett had never been that. They came from a law firm addressed to me on heavy cream stationery with an embossed letterhead. The language was measured and precise and specifically designed to produce anxiety without making any accusation specific enough to defend against. It questioned my qualifications as a caregiver. It referenced Dorothy's complex medical needs. It used the phrase more appropriate living arrangement 4 times in 3 pages, like a bell being rung. I showed the letters to Eli that evening. He read them twice, then took photographs of every page and sent them to his cousin Nadia Sutton, who worked as a paralegal at a small litigation firm downtown. Nadia came over 2 days later on her lunch break, sat at my kitchen table with the printed letters in front of her, and read through them with the focused attention of someone who does this professionally. "They're fishing," she said. "There's no specific accusation of neglect or abuse, nothing they'd be required to substantiate. They're using legal language to make you feel like you're already under investigation so that you'll make accommodating choices to avoid the scrutiny." Can they actually pursue guardianship? They can file a petition. A judge would have to hear it. For it to succeed, they'd need to demonstrate that Dorothy requires a guardian and that you're not the appropriate person to serve that role. They'd want medical testimony questioning her current care and probably expert testimony about her ongoing needs. Nadia set the letters down. But if you have documentation, consistent, thorough, professional, it makes their case significantly harder. What kind of documentation? Everything. Every medication administration, logged with time and date, every doctor's visit, every therapy session, every communication with medical providers. A record of her daily routine, not because you need to justify yourself morally, but because a judge looking at that record sees not chaos, but consistency, care. Nadia looked at me steadily. "You've been doing this for 11 months. Have you been keeping records?" "Some, not formally. Start formally, today." I started that evening. I created a daily care log in a notebook. Time Dorothy woke, medications administered with times, meals, physical therapy exercises, mood observations, any notable events. I requested written summaries from Dorothy's neurologist and her physical therapist. I called Sandra Oakes, the social worker, and asked her to document her monthly assessments in writing going forward. Both the physical therapist and Sandra provided statements without hesitation. The physical therapist wrote 3 paragraphs about Dorothy's progress that made me have to put the letter down for a moment before I could finish reading it. Eli repaired the dripping kitchen faucet that had been dripping since October. He installed a grab bar in the bathroom, proper hardware store grade, anchored into the studs. He built a small bookshelf from a flat-pack kit for Dorothy's growing collection of library paperbacks, and she supervised the assembly from her chair with the focused, critical eye of a foreman who has opinions about tolerances. One afternoon, while he was measuring the window for new curtains, the old ones let in a draft that Dorothy's circulation couldn't afford in winter. She reached out and tugged the back of his shirt. He turned, surprised. She pointed at me, then at him, then placed her hand on her chest. Slow, emphatic, the gesture she reserved for the things that mattered most. She nodded once. He looked at me. His face had gone a color I had not seen before. "I think she's saying she approves," I said. "Of the curtains?" "Of you." Oh. He turned back to the window, picked up the measuring tape. Okay. Dorothy made a sound, not quite a laugh, but close. A small, controlled exhalation with clear intention behind it. We both looked at her. She had already closed her eyes, the expression on her face the particular serenity of someone who has said what they wanted to say and is content to let it settle. The guardianship petition was filed in early December, 11 months and 1 week after Garrett had dropped Dorothy at my door on Christmas Eve. The hearing was scheduled for the 3rd week of December in a small wood-paneled courtroom that smelled like old paper and central heating. There was no jury. A family court judge named the Honorable Patricia Osei, who had the careful, unhurried manner of someone who has heard every variety of family dysfunction and remains, somehow, genuinely interested in the particulars of each one. Garrett's attorney made his case methodically. The studio apartment, not a suitable long-term environment for a stroke patient. The caregiver's lack of medical credentials. The demanding work schedule. The absence of professional oversight. He was good, he was organized, he had clearly prepared, and then our side presented. Sandra Oakes, in a gray blazer, testified calmly and in detail about Dorothy's consistent improvement under current care. The physical therapist submitted a written assessment describing Dorothy's functional progress as exceeding initial projections. Dorothy's neurologist, who had agreed to provide a brief deposition, stated on the record that his patient was receiving appropriate care and showing positive neurological indicators. And Irving Kellner, who appeared, to Garrett's visible confusion, at the respondent's table beside me, placed before the judge a single notarized document. It was a medical power of attorney, executed and witnessed and legally certified. Dorothy had signed it 22 days before her stroke, designating Ismarie Catherine Hensley as the person authorized to make medical decisions on her behalf in the event she was unable to do so herself. The document had been prepared by Irving Kellner, notarized by a certified notary at his office, filed with the county recorder's office the same week it was signed. Dorothy had made this decision before the stroke, when she was unambiguously competent, when no one could argue she had been pressured or manipulated because at the time she signed it, I was a waitress she had not seen in 2 years. Garrett's attorney asked for a recess. Judge Osei denied it. The petition for guardianship was dismissed. I walked out of the courthouse into December afternoon air that was sharp and clear and smelled like cold pavement and someone's Christmas wreath from a building across the street. Eli was on the front steps, hands in his pockets, watching the door. How did it go? We won. He didn't say anything else. He just stepped forward and put his arms around me, and I let him, and we stood on the courthouse steps while the December wind moved through the street and the city went about its business around us. Behind us, the courthouse doors opened, and Irving Kellner came out, buttoning his coat. He nodded at me, looked at Eli, looked back at me. Dorothy will be ready soon, he said simply. She'll tell you herself when the time comes. He walked down the steps and turned the corner and was gone. 3 days after the hearing, on a Saturday night, Orrin came to the steakhouse. I didn't see him at first. The dinner rush was heavy for December. Holiday parties, family gatherers, couples who had dressed up for the occasion and were studying their menus with the focus of people who wanted the evening to justify the effort. I was carrying a tray of drinks to a corner table when I heard my name. He was in a booth near the window. No tie. A dark jacket over a light blue shirt, the collar open. He looked tired in a way that wasn't recent. The kind of tired that has settled in over months and stopped announcing itself, just become part of the landscape of his face. There were shadows under his eyes I didn't remember, and he had lost weight in the particular way that stress takes weight from the face first. Stephanie was not with him. I noted this without asking. 5 minutes, he said when I stopped at the booth. Please. My manager was watching from the service station. I slid into the seat across from him. 5 minutes. Orrin did not lead with strategy. That surprised me. He looked at his hands first, then at me, and when he spoke, it was without the careful cadence of someone who has rehearsed. What Garrett did, coming to the apartment like that, the papers, all of it, that was wrong. I told him before he went that it was a bad idea. He doesn't listen. He's never listened. He paused. That's not an excuse. I should have done more than tell him. I should have come myself a long time ago. I should have visited. I should have helped. I waited. I'm not here to ask for anything, he said. I want you to know that first. I'm here because I owe you an apology and I wanted to give it in person. You got stuck with her because no one else stepped up. That wasn't fair. Okay, I said. He looked up. That's it? What would you like me to say, Oren? He sat back. Something moved through his face, the faint frustration of someone who had expected a different kind of reception, not because they deserved it, but because they had hoped for it. Then it settled. Nothing, I guess. I wanted you to know I mean it. I believe you, I said, and I did, mostly. What happened with Stephanie? A brief silence. She left. In October. She said she didn't sign up for what my life had turned into. He looked out the window at the dark street. I don't blame her, actually. I'm not sure I signed up for it either. What did your life turn into? He didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the table. Some of the investment decisions I made weren't. I trusted people I shouldn't have trusted. I went along with things I should have questioned. I told myself that was normal, that everyone operates in gray areas, that results are what matter. He stopped. The results weren't good. I looked at him. He was not performing. I was almost certain of that. But I had grown up watching Oren be believed, watching him receive the benefit of every doubt in every room he entered, and I had learned to look more carefully than most people did. What do you want, Oren? I said, not unkindly, just directly. He met my eyes. I want to be better than I've been. That's it. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm not asking you to let me fix anything. I want you to know that I'm trying. He paused. And I want to know how she is. I thought about Dorothy at the window in the December morning light, watching the street, the grab bar in the bathroom Eli had installed, the shelf of library paperbacks, the sound she had made, the sound that was almost a laugh, when Eli got confused about the tap code. She's good, I said. She's better than she was. Something in his face eased, genuinely, not performed. Good, he said quietly. That's good. I stood up. My 3 tables were waiting. I have to go. Of course. He nodded. Then, Izmiri. I stopped. She wrote to me, he said. Dorothy, a letter, about 2 months ago, just a few lines. She said. He paused, choosing the words carefully. She said she hoped I was paying attention. I looked at him. I'm trying to, he said. I walked back to my section. An hour later, when the busboy cleared the table, he found a $40 bill tucked under the empty coffee cup that Oren had never ordered. I stood at the service station looking at it for a moment. She wrote to him too, I thought. Dorothy had been watching all of us, all along, through all of it. Through the tap codes and the tea and the letters to Irving Kellner and the quiet correspondence conducted through Mr. Delgado on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, she had been watching, gathering information, making assessments with the patience of a woman who understood in the deepest way that character is only visible over time. She had been waiting to see who we really were, and she had written to Oren. I finished my shift, drove home in the cold December dark, unlocked the apartment door. Dorothy was awake sitting by the window in the glow of the streetlights outside. She turned when I came in. He came to the restaurant, I said. She tapped once. I know. You wrote to him. 1 tap. Did you write to all of them? She held my gaze. Then she raised 1 hand and held up 2 fingers. 2. Oren and someone else. Irving? I guessed. She shook her head slightly. I thought about it. I thought about what she had said to me through Irving Kellner on the phone that first morning. The tea is fine. I just wanted her to work for it a little. The particular dry warmth of it. The willingness to let a joke carry weight. Eli, I said. She didn't tap. She just held my gaze for a long moment with that expression I had been learning to read over the past year. The one that said, "You're catching up. Keep going." Then she turned back to the window. Outside, the December sky was heavy and dark, and somewhere up in it, unseen, the first snow of the season was deciding whether or not to fall. The snow started just after 5 o'clock on the evening of December 24th. Not the hesitant, uncommitted snow of the year before, the kind that fell on Garrett's overcoat while he set 2 suitcases on the sidewalk and drove away without saying goodbye. This was decided snow, the kind that means it. It came down in thick, unhurried flakes that settled on the windowsill and softened the edges of everything outside until the street below looked like something someone had painted from memory rather than observation. I stood at the kitchen counter watching it and thought, 1 year ago tonight, I was standing on that sidewalk in my work uniform, smelling like béarnaise sauce, holding 2 suitcases I hadn't packed, looking at a woman I barely knew and having no idea what came next. I still didn't know what came next exactly, but the not knowing felt different now. Less like standing at the edge of something and more like standing in the middle of it, which is its own kind of stability if you let it be. The apartment looked different than it had a year ago. Eli's curtains were up, a warm cream fabric that did what curtains are supposed to do, which is keep the cold out and let the light through at the right angle. The grab bar in the bathroom caught the light when the door was open. Dorothy's shelf of library paperbacks had expanded to 2 shelves, and she had developed a strong and slightly competitive relationship with the mystery section of the branch library around the corner, where the librarian, a soft-spoken man named Gerald, had started setting aside new acquisitions he thought she would like. Dorothy was in her chair by the window with her evening tea, 2 sugars, the right brand, brewed for exactly 4 minutes, watching the snow come down with the particular quality of attention she brought to weather. Not passive observation, active interest as though the snow were doing something worth studying. Eli was on the floor near the bookshelf, replacing a screw that had worked loose from one of the brackets. He had brought dinner, a pot of something that had been simmering in his slow cooker since morning, chicken and root vegetables, the kind of meal that fills a small apartment with warmth from the inside out. "The bracket's fine now," he said, standing. "Give it a couple hours before you load it back up." Dorothy tapped once without turning around. Noted. He grinned and came into the kitchen where I was reheating the last of the bread. He leaned against the counter beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched, and looked out the window at the falling snow. "1 year," he said. 1 year. "How does it feel?" I thought about it honestly. Like something that was supposed to be temporary became the thing everything else is organized around. And I don't mind that. He didn't say anything. He just stayed where he was, shoulder against mine, watching the snow. My phone rang at 7:15. The name on the screen said Irving O. Kellner. I answered immediately. "Miss Hensley." His voice had its customary steadiness, but underneath it tonight there was something that might, in a less composed man, have been called warmth. "I'm calling on Dorothy's behalf. She asked me to reach out this evening. Is everything all right?" "Everything is very much all right. She would like you and Mr. Sutton to come to the downtown branch of Callaway Savings on the 27th. She has something she needs to do in person, and she'd like you both present." "What kind of something?" A brief pause. "She'll explain it herself. She's been waiting quite a long time to do this the right way, and she wanted me to tell you, and I'm quoting her letter directly here, 'Don't make a fuss beforehand. Just come.'" I almost smiled. "Did she say anything else?" "She said, and again I am quoting, 'Tell Ismarie the snow is doing exactly what snow should do, which is arrive when it's supposed to and not make excuses about it.'" I looked out the window at the falling snow. Then I looked at Dorothy, who had not turned from the window, but whose shoulders had shifted very slightly, the subtle recalibration of someone who knows they are being watched and is choosing, with some enjoyment, not to acknowledge it. "We'll be there," I said. I hung up, stood for a moment in the kitchen with the phone in my hand. "Eli." "I heard," he said. "She's planned something. She's been planning something for a long time." He was looking at Dorothy's back, at the silver of her hair against the window light. "She's been the most patient person in any room she's been in for this entire year. Whatever it is, she decided it a long time ago." From her chair, Dorothy tapped once on the armrest without turning around. "Correct." I crossed the room and sat on the low stool beside her chair, the one I kept there for the evenings when we watched the street together. Outside, the snow continued its unhurried work on the neighborhood. The streetlights had taken on their winter halos. Somewhere below, a car moved slowly through the intersection, its headlights sweeping across the buildings. I looked at her profile, the straight line of her nose, the composed set of her mouth. "Are you going to tell me anything?" I said. She turned her head slowly and looked at me. Then she did what she always did when the tap codes weren't enough and words weren't yet available. She raised her hand and placed it flat against her chest. Steady, deliberate. The gesture I had never been able to assign a code to because it was not a code. It was something older. Then she pointed at me. I sat with that for a moment. The snow outside, the warmth of the apartment around us, the sound of Eli washing the dinner bowls in the kitchen, unhurried, at home. "Okay," I said. She turned back to the window, picked up her tea, took a sip. "2 sugars," she said. Her voice was low and slightly rough, the way it always was these days. like an instrument that has been restored rather than replaced, carrying the marks of what it had been through. But it was clear. It was hers. "I know," I said. "Good." She settled back into her chair. "Then stop worrying." The 27th of December was a Monday, bright and cold, the sky the particular hard blue that follows heavy snow. The downtown branch of Callaway Savings occupied a building from a previous century. Marble floors the color of old cream, brass fixtures that had been polished so many times they had softened at the edges, the hushed, weighted atmosphere of a place that takes money seriously enough to give it architectural dignity. I had walked past it 100 times and never been inside. We arrived at 10 o'clock. Dorothy walked between Eli and me, her cane clicking lightly on the marble. She moved more slowly than she had a year ago, in the sense that a year ago she had been in a wheelchair. In actual terms, she moved considerably better. The physical therapy had done what the therapist had said it might do if Dorothy applied herself, and Dorothy had applied herself with the focused commitment of someone settling a score with her own body. She was dressed carefully. Dark slacks, a wool blazer in deep burgundy, her silver hair combed back from her face. She looked, I thought, like a woman who had decided what the occasion called for and met it precisely. Garrett was already in the conference room. He was sitting at one side of a small rectangular table beside a man in a gray suit I didn't recognize, and Patricia Winslow, the branch manager, whose nameplate I read when we entered. Garrett stood when we came in with the practiced warmth of a man who has spent decades performing reasonableness for audiences he needs something from. "Dorothy, Ismiri." He nodded at Eli without acknowledging him by name. "Thank you all for coming. I know it's the holiday week." "What is this about, Garrett?" I said. I had no patience left for the opening ceremonies. He settled into his chair. "Standard procedure given the changes in circumstances over the past year. I've filed some paperwork with the bank, a request to be added as an authorized signatory on Dorothy's accounts. Given her condition, the family felt it was responsible to have someone accessible who can handle financial matters if..." "Given my condition," Dorothy said. The room went still. Not the polite quiet of a pause in conversation. The absolute stillness of people who have just experienced something that requires their assumptions to be rebuilt from the ground. Garrett's mouth remained open for a moment. The man in the gray suit, Garrett's attorney, I would learn, looked up from his notepad. Patricia Winslow set down her pen. Dorothy was sitting straight in her chair at the head of the table, her hands folded in front of her, looking at Garrett with the expression of someone who has waited a very long time for a specific moment and finds, now that it has arrived, that they are entirely ready for it. "Given my condition," she said again, in the low, measured voice that had been returning to her for months, growing stronger and steadier with each week of speech therapy. "That's what you were about to say." Garrett's voice came back to him in pieces. Dorothy, you can speak. Yes." She did not look away from him. "I've been able to for a while now." "How long?" "Long enough." She turned to Patricia Winslow. "I'm competent. I have documentation from 3 independent physicians. 2 of them are on the hospital's ethics board. My attorney has the complete file. His name is Irving Kellner, and I'd suggest you call him before proceeding with anything my brother has asked you to do." And she recited Irving's phone number from memory. 11 digits without hesitation. Patricia Winslow wrote it down. Garrett found his footing. The shock was receding and something else was replacing it. The familiar forward momentum of a man who believes that circumstances can always be renegotiated. "This doesn't change anything, Dorothy. The family has legitimate concerns about your care situation. You're living in a studio apartment with a woman who has no medical credentials." "I'm living," Dorothy said, with a precision that made the word land like something placed rather than thrown, "with my granddaughter, who has been taking care of me for 13 months, who reorganized her entire life to do so, who was at my door within 24 hours of being told I needed help." She paused. "You, Garrett, have not visited once." I know what you've been." Her voice did not rise. It didn't need to. "You've been looking for access to accounts you didn't know existed until your own investments failed and you ran out of other options." She looked at him steadily. "You took my house. You told me it was the smart move. You told me Walter would have approved, and then you lost every dollar of it, and you moved on to the next thing and the next, and now you're here." The room was very quiet. "Dorothy," Garrett started. "I'm not finished." She did not raise her voice. "Ismiri didn't know I could speak. I didn't tell her. I needed to understand who she was without the performance, without her adjusting herself because she knew she was being evaluated. A pause. I watched her for 13 months. I watched her rearrange her work schedule and learn to read my signals and fight your legal petition and keep records and get up in the middle of the night when my blood pressure spiked and drive me to appointments and never, not once, go through my things looking for what she could get from me. She turned and looked at me for the first time since we had sat down. She was kind, Dorothy said, when there was absolutely nothing to gain from being kind. I could not speak. I looked at my hands on the table. That, Dorothy said, turning back to Patricia Winslow, is the person I chose. Now, please call Irving Kellner. I have a document for you to review. Irving arrived 11 minutes after Patricia Winslow's call, which told me he had been nearby, waiting, I realized, in the coffee shop 2 blocks from the bank. He had his briefcase and the specific unhurried manner of a man for whom arriving exactly when needed is a professional standard. He greeted Dorothy with the quiet warmth of someone who has communicated with a person for months through handwritten letters and is meeting them in full voice for the first time. She nodded at him. He nodded back. Between them passed the compressed understanding of people who have done serious work together without ever being in the same room. He set his briefcase on the table and opened it. Garrett's attorney, who had still not introduced himself and was looking increasingly uncomfortable with that decision, leaned forward slightly. Whatever you've brought, I'd want to review it before. You're welcome to. Irving placed a document on the table in front of Patricia Winslow. This is a certified copy. The original has been on file with the county recorder's office since October 15th. Patricia Winslow read. Her expression, which had been carefully neutral since Dorothy had first spoken, shifted in small increments, the slight widening of attention that comes with understanding something significant. What is it? I asked. It's a trust transfer document, Irving said, to me rather than to the room. Executed, witnessed, and notarized. Dorothy completed it in October, following evaluations by 3 independent physicians who certified her capacity and submitted their findings to the ethics board for the record. He paused. The document transfers the entirety of the Callaway Family Trust, including all accounts, holdings, and accrued assets therein, to you, Ismarie. The room was very still. To me, I said. To you. I looked at Dorothy. She was watching me with the expression I had come to know best over 13 months. Direct, patient, asking nothing in return for what it offered. Dorothy. Garrett's voice had changed entirely. The performance was gone. What was left was something rawer and less controlled. That money, you can't, that's family money. Walter, Dorothy said, intended exactly this. He intended it for the family. He intended it for someone who would take care of what mattered. Her voice was iron in the most precise sense, not brittle, not sharp, just absolutely resistant to being moved. He hid those accounts from you and from Calandra and from Braxley because he watched you for 30 years and he knew. He knew what would happen if you had access to them. A pause. He told me the night before he died. He said, Dot, the right person will show up eventually. You'll know them because they won't be looking for it. Garrett was on his feet. This is manipulation. Undue influence. She's been living with this woman for over a year, isolated from the rest of the family, and you expect anyone to believe that. I was evaluated by 3 independent physicians, Dorothy said for the second time, with the patience of someone who has anticipated this response and prepared for it accordingly. 2 of them sit on the hospital ethics board. I signed nothing under pressure and everything in the presence of legal counsel. I had full capacity and full information. She looked at Garrett. Irving has the evaluation reports, the notarized consent forms, the witness affidavits, and the filed trust documents. If you want to challenge this in court, you're welcome to. But I'd encourage you to ask your attorney first what the cost-benefit analysis looks like. Garrett's attorney had been reading the document for the past 3 minutes. He placed it back on the table now with the careful movements of a man who has just understood something he does not want to have understood. How much? I said to Irving, because I needed to know and there was no graceful way to approach it. The trust, including the original accounts your grandfather established and 41 years of compound interest on the undisbursed principal, is currently valued at approximately $2,300,000. I put both hands flat on the table. The marble was cold and solid and absolutely real. $2,300,000. $300,000, hidden in plain sight for 4 decades, in an account held under Dorothy's maiden name, Dorothy Mae Weston, at a small Midwestern bank where Walter had opened it 41 years ago with careful, quiet deliberateness, with the patience of a man who understood that the right moment was worth waiting for. The routing number that had led nowhere. The $900 a month that I had traced and been unable to source. Dorothy had been drawing on the trust's interest from the beginning, testing the mechanism, yes, but also providing. Watching to see what I would do with money that arrived with no explanation attached to it. "She was testing you," Eli said quietly beside me. "No." Dorothy looked at him. "I was taking care of her. The test was for me." She paused. "I needed to know I was making the right choice. Every month the money came and went to the right places. Her prescriptions, the physical therapy, the things I could see from the window that she needed and wouldn't ask for. I needed to see that, to be certain." Garrett slammed his palm on the table. "I will challenge this. Mental incapacity, undue influence, isolation from family. Garrett," Irving's voice was mild, "I've been Dorothy's attorney for 32 years. I have documentation for every element of this process. If you file a challenge, I'll be ready for it. But I want you to understand clearly what the record shows. A competent woman of sound mind with independent legal counsel made a considered decision over a period of months. The evidentiary bar you would need to clear is not one I believe you can reach." A pause. "That is my professional assessment." Garrett looked around the room, at his attorney, who had the expression of a man calculating outcomes, at Patricia Winslow, who had folded her hands on the document in front of her and was looking at Garrett with the polite impassivity of an institution that does not take sides, at Dorothy, who was looking back at him without anger and without satisfaction. Just the steady, tired clarity of someone who has been waiting a very long time to be done with something. And at me. "You planned this," he said. His voice had gone quiet, quieter than I had ever heard it. "You took her in and you planned this from the beginning." "I took her in," I said, "because you left her on my doorstep on Christmas Eve and drove away without saying goodbye to her." Garrett gathered his papers. He did it slowly, with the deliberate movements of a man who is using physical action to manage the fact that he has nothing left to say. His attorney rose beside him, silent. At the door, Garrett stopped. He did not turn around. He stood there for a moment with his hand on the doorframe, and I watched his shoulders rise and fall once with a breath that seemed to cost him something. Then he walked out. The door closed. In the conference room, the marble and brass silence settled back around us. Patricia Winslow uncapped her pen. Irving began organizing his files. Eli let out a long, quiet breath beside me. Dorothy reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "In the elevator on Christmas Eve," she said, "I wrote 3 letters on your hand. Do you remember?" "I thought you were telling me you were okay." "I know." The corner of her mouth moved. "You were so worried about me that you heard what you needed to hear rather than what I was saying. I decided it was a good sign." The letters were his initials. Irving's. "Yes." "You had it planned before I even got you up to the apartment." "I had the beginning of a plan," she said. "The rest of it I watched you build for me, 1 month at a time, without knowing you were doing it." She squeezed my hand once, lightly. "That's the only way to know if something is real. You have to watch it happen without telling it what to do." I looked down at our hands on the cold marble table. Her fingers were warmer than I expected. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I said. "That you could speak. Why did you wait so long?" She was quiet for a moment. Outside the tall windows of the conference room, the December light moved across the marble floor. "Because," she said finally, "I needed to know who you were when you thought no one was watching. Not who you were when you were being good for an audience." She paused. "I've spent a great deal of my life surrounded by people who were performing goodness for specific observers. I needed to know the difference." She let go of my hand, sat back, looked at me steadily. "Now I know," she said, "and now you know what I kept." The meeting was Garrett's idea. He sent word through Calandra, which was how he had always operated, using other people as the surface of his request so that the request itself arrived pre-cushioned, pre-accepted, already embedded in the texture of family expectation. It was the 2nd week of January. A restaurant downtown, neutral ground, or what Garrett apparently considered neutral ground, which was a place he had chosen and made the reservation for. They were already seated when we arrived. Garrett, Calandra, Braxley, Oren. 4 people around a round table in the private dining room with the strained arrangement of people who are performing civility because the performance is still, barely, preferable to the alternative. Dorothy walked in without her cane. She had been working without it for 2 weeks, and her physical therapist had cleared her for short distances on even ground. She moved carefully, but independently, and she sat down at the table with the composed deliberateness of a woman who has decided exactly how much space she is going to occupy and is not available for negotiation on the subject. "Mother." Garrett stood. His voice had recovered the practiced warmth. "You look well." "I am well," she said. She settled her napkin in her lap. "Let's not waste each other's time." Calandra leaned forward slightly. She was wearing the expression she wore for serious conversations, attentive, controlled, the look of someone prepared to manage whatever emerged. "We just want to understand what happened. The transfer, the trust, it came as a shock to all of us. We weren't aware that your father had—" "You weren't meant to be aware," Dorothy said. "That was the point." "That's not—" Calandra stopped, began again. "We're your family. If there were significant assets, it would have been natural to—" "To what?" Dorothy's voice was quiet and completely without heat, which made it more effective than anger would have been. "To know about them? To plan around them? To find a way to access them before I was ready?" She looked at Calandra directly. "Your father understood what knowing would do. He watched your uncle for 30 years. He knew." Calandra sat back. Something moved through her face. The compressed, private expression of a person encountering a truth they already knew and had hoped not to have confirmed. "You visited every week when you thought I had something," Dorothy continued. "When the house was gone, you came less. When I had the stroke, you waited 3 days to call your own daughter." She said it without particular emphasis, just the facts of it, laid out simply. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you, Calandra. I'm telling you because I think you know it's true, and I think we have both spent too many years pretending otherwise." Calandra did not respond. She looked at the table. Braxley said, quietly, "Dorothy, I'm sorry. For my part in all of it, I should have—" He stopped. His voice had the particular roughness of a man who is not practiced at this kind of sentence. "I should have done better." Dorothy looked at him for a moment. "I know, Braxley," she said. Not warmly, but not unkindly either. "I know." Garrett had been silent through all of this. He was looking at his water glass with the expression of a man who has decided that speaking will cost him more than silence. "Garrett." Dorothy turned to him. Last. "You told me the investment was guaranteed. You told me Walter would have wanted me to take the opportunity. You sat at my kitchen table and you looked me in the eye and you told me I would triple my money." She paused. "I believed you because I wanted to believe that my brother had my interests at heart. That was my mistake. It doesn't make it less of a lie." Garrett said nothing. "The account you were looking for," Dorothy continued, "the one you've been trying to access for the past year, it doesn't exist in the form you imagined. The money was never sitting somewhere waiting to be found by the right person. Walter structured it so that it required my signature and my attorney's verification for any disbursement. You could not have taken it without my cooperation. What you were trying to do, with the papers at the apartment, with the guardianship petition, was get that cooperation by other means." She looked at him. "I want you to understand that I understood exactly what you were doing. I was not confused. I was not diminished. I was watching." Garrett looked up. His face had the gray, flattened quality of a man who has been running on a particular energy for a long time and has just run out of it. "The transfer is final," Dorothy said. "Irving has the documentation. If you choose to challenge it, that is your right, and I would encourage you to consult with an attorney who will give you an honest assessment of your prospects." She paused. "But I hope you won't. Not because I'm asking for anything from you, because I think you've spent enough of your life on bad investments." The table was silent. Oren had not spoken. He was looking at his hands in his lap, and when Dorothy said his name, he looked up with the expression of someone who has been hoping not to be called on and is, nonetheless, ready. "You came to the restaurant," Dorothy said. "You apologized to your sister." "I tried to." "Was it real?" He held her gaze. I watched him decide in real time whether to perform or to answer. "It started as something I thought I should do," he said, "but by the end, yes." I think by the end it was real. A pause. I've been thinking about the difference a lot lately, between doing the right thing because it looks good and doing it because it's right. I haven't always been able to tell them apart. Dorothy studied him for a long moment. That's more self-knowledge than most people manage, she said. Don't waste it. Oren nodded. He looked like a man taking a prescription he knows he needs. Calandra made one more attempt. She turned to me as I stood to help Dorothy with her coat. Ismiri, we've made mistakes, all of us, but family is... These things are complicated, and if there's any way to... Family isn't complicated, Mom. I looked at her, not with anger. Anger had been useful for a while, and then it had become expensive, and I had quietly stopped spending it somewhere around month 8. What I felt now was something more like clarity, the specific lightness of a thing that has been put down after being carried for a long time. You made choices. I made choices. That's not complicated. That's just what happened. I helped Dorothy with her coat. Eli was already at the door. Oren, I stopped on the way out. He looked up. If you want to send her a card sometimes, she'd read it. I paused. She reads everything. Something shifted in his face. Okay, he said quietly. Thank you. We walked out. Behind us, I heard the restaurant settle back into its ordinary sounds. The murmur of other tables, the clink of silverware, the distant sound of the kitchen doing what kitchens do. The sounds of the world that does not stop for the particular rearrangements of a single family. Outside on the sidewalk, the January air was sharp and clean. Dorothy took a careful breath of it. Eli stood on her other side, not touching, just present. Well, Dorothy said. Well, I said. She looked down the street, where a delivery truck was double parked and someone on a bicycle was navigating around it with considerable optimism. Tea, she said. I think we've earned some tea. The investigation into Garrett opened in February. It turned out that the Sunbelt real estate investment that had taken Dorothy's house had not been an isolated failure. Over the course of 8 years, Garrett had run variations of the same model across a network of investors. Most of them older, most of them women, most of them introduced through the particular trust that Family Connection makes available. The mechanics varied, but the structure was consistent. Legitimate seeming opportunity, pressure to decide quickly, assurances of oversight that didn't exist. Losses absorbed by investors while fees were absorbed by Garrett. Dorothy was not the only family member who had lost money. She was, it emerged, the one who had documented everything most carefully. The letters she had written to Irving over the past year were not solely about the trust transfer. They were a record. Dates, conversations, specific representations Garrett had made, specific assurances he had given. Written in longhand on plain paper, delivered by a retired mail carrier who had never been asked to keep secrets before, and turned out to be very good at it. Irving cooperated with the investigators. Garrett was charged in April. Oren was questioned as a witness. He was not charged. His involvement had been peripheral, and he cooperated fully. He lost his position at the financial firm regardless, because proximity to that kind of story tends to be its own penalty regardless of legal outcome. He moved to a smaller apartment in a different part of the city and, I heard through Braxley, started working for a nonprofit that did financial literacy education in underserved communities. Whether this was genuine or another performance, I couldn't say with certainty. I chose to believe it was something in between. A man moving towards something real by starting with what looked like the right direction and hoping the feeling would follow. Braxley called me in March. He called on a Sunday afternoon, which was the time of day he had always preferred for difficult things, and his voice had the careful steadiness of someone who has rehearsed an opening and is trusting that the rest will come. I'm sorry, he said. I should have protected you better. All those years, I knew it wasn't fair to you, and I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, which is the thing men tell themselves when they don't want to do hard things. A pause. That's not an excuse. I just wanted you to know that I knew, and that I'm sorry. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long moment. Okay, Dad, I said. I hear you. He didn't ask for more than that, which was the right instinct. Some things require time before they can be more than acknowledged. We talked for 20 minutes about other things. His garden, a book he was reading, the fact that the water heater in my childhood home had finally been replaced. Small, ordinary things, the kind that carry weight precisely because they are ordinary. Calandra did not call. I had not expected her to, and I found that the not expecting was itself a kind of resolution. She was who she was. I was who I was. The space between those two facts was not happiness exactly, but it was honest, and honesty has a durability that happiness sometimes doesn't. In late March, on a Saturday when the first real warmth of the approaching spring was just beginning to make itself felt in the afternoon air, I signed the lease on a 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building 6 blocks west of the old studio. Real bedrooms, a kitchen with counter space on both sides, a bathroom with a window, and in the larger bedroom, facing the street, a wide sill that ran the full length of the window, deep enough to sit on, with a view that took in 3 blocks of the neighborhood below. Dorothy stood at that window for a long time when we came to look at the apartment. She didn't say anything. She just stood there with her hand resting on the sill and looked down at the street. At the dry cleaner on the corner, the bodega with the hand-lettered sign, the children in winter coats still just barely necessary starting to seem excessive, a dog being walked with more optimism than coordination. "This is your room," I said. She turned from the window and looked at me, then at the room, then back at the window. "Yes," she said. All right. Moving day was the first Saturday in April, which arrived with the tentative warmth of a season still deciding whether to commit. Eli brought his truck, which was the vehicle of a man who did actual work, scratched and practical, with a bed big enough for furniture and a cab that smelled like motor oil and the particular air freshener that reminded me, for reasons I had never analyzed, of being somewhere safe. His cousin Nadia came with coffee and an organizational energy that made the morning feel both manageable and slightly supervised. Dorothy supervised from her chair, which we had moved to the center of each room in turn so that she could direct the placement of everything with the combination of tap signals and spoken words that had become, over these months, so natural I no longer thought of them as a system. It was just how we talked. Eli and Nadia carried boxes. Dorothy told them where things went. I unpacked the kitchen, which was my preferred form of order making. The logic of a kitchen, the way everything has a correct relationship to everything else, had always made sense to me in a way that other kinds of order didn't. Around noon, I heard Dorothy laugh. A real one. Not the small, controlled exhalation I had loved for months, but an actual laugh, full and short and surprised out of her. I came to the doorway of her room and found Eli standing in the middle of the floor holding a framed photograph and looking at it with such obvious bewilderment that I could see why she had laughed. "Who is this?" he said, holding it toward her. "My husband and his brother at a fishing tournament in 1978. She looked at the photograph with the particular expression of someone who loved a person and found them also perpetually ridiculous. They caught one fish between them and Walter held it up like he'd won a championship. "He looks very proud." He was very proud. That was his gift. He could be genuinely proud of small things. It made him very easy to be around, she paused, and very occasionally infuriating. Eli set the photograph carefully on the shelf he had built for her. It leaned at a slight angle. He adjusted it. "There," Dorothy said. "Yes, that's right." He turned around. She was looking at him with the expression I recognized, the one she had first shown me in the elevator on Christmas Eve, the one that had taken me months to learn to read. Assessment and warmth held together without one diminishing the other. "You're a good man, Eli Sutton," she said, simply the way she said the things she meant most, without preamble or qualification. "I'm glad she found you at the pharmacy and not somewhere worse." He went red in the specific way he only went red around her. I was having a very frustrating insurance dispute. The best things often start with frustration. She waved a hand. "Now, put the books on the shelf. She'll want them in order by author." "I don't actually," I started. "You do," Dorothy said without looking at me. She was right. I did. Late afternoon, the apartment beginning to look like the place it was going to become. Nadia had gone home with the coffee cups and a large portion of the leftover pasta Eli had brought. The light through Dorothy's window had turned the particular gold of a spring evening just tipping toward dusk. I was in the kitchen making tea. Loose-leaf English breakfast, 4 minutes exactly, 2 sugars in Dorothy's cup, when I heard her call my name. Not a tap code, just my name, in her voice, from her room. I poured the tea and carried both cups down the hall. She was sitting on the windowsill. Her cane leaned against the wall. Outside, the street was doing its early evening thing. People walking home from wherever the day had taken them. A delivery cyclist navigating the intersection with practiced ease. A woman with a stroller stopped to look at something in a shop window. The child inside reaching toward the glass. Dorothy had her hands in her lap and was watching all of it with the focused, generous attention she brought to everything she decided was worth watching. I set her cup beside her on the sill. 2 sugars, I said. I know. She picked it up, held it in both hands the way she always did, taking the warmth of it first. Sit down. I sat on the edge of her bed, facing the window. For a while, neither of us said anything. The street went about its business. The light shifted slowly from gold to the softer, more tentative color that comes just before dark. Somewhere down the hall, I could hear Eli talking to himself as he assembled the remaining bookshelf. Occasional muttered commentary on the instructions, which he had once described as written by someone who has only heard about furniture secondhand. I've been thinking about something, Dorothy said. What? About what Walter said to me the night before he died. She looked at her tea. He said, the right person will show up eventually. You'll know them because they won't be looking for it. I've thought about that sentence for a long time. What he meant. Whether he was right. Was he? She looked at me. Outside the window, the child in the stroller had gotten whatever she was reaching for. A small stuffed animal, dropped and recovered, held up now with triumph. The mother laughed, the child laughed, the street moved on. He was describing you, Dorothy said. I understood that when I found out you'd been withdrawing from the mystery account for 6 months and using every dollar for my prescriptions and physical therapy and kept receipts for every single cent. A pause. Other people would have bought themselves something, or put it away, or asked questions. She looked at her tea again. You kept receipts because you were ready to give it back. I didn't know what to say to that. The money is yours, she said, not because you earned it as payment, because Walter was right. Because I watched for 13 months and what I saw was someone who would have done every single thing she did exactly the same way whether the money existed or not. She looked at me. I needed to be certain before I gave it to you. Now I am. Down the hall, the bookshelf apparently reached a critical juncture. Eli said something I couldn't quite hear, and Dorothy's mouth moved in the small, controlled way that meant she was working to keep the laugh in. He puts them together wrong every time, she said. Then he figures it out on the last step. He does, I said. He'll be fine. She said, you'll both be fine. She said it the way she said the things she had decided, not as reassurance, but as fact. The quiet authority of a woman who has been paying attention for a very long time. I sat there on the edge of her bed in the new apartment in the April evening, listening to the street outside and the sound of Eli's occasional commentary down the hall, and I thought about the word fine. How I had spent 23 years of my life being told I was practical and managing and fine. And how fine had felt in those years like the smallest room in a house where other people had the larger ones. This was different. This was not the fine of managing. This was the fine of something that had come through difficulty and was still standing at the end of it, a different shape than it had been before, but solid, real, held together not by pretending that nothing had broken, but by being honest about what had and choosing any way to stay. The kettle on the kitchen counter was still warm. I had made 3 cups. I got up and went to get Eli's. Eli, I called down the hall. Almost done, he called back. 1 more, there, yes, okay, done. Tea, a pause. 2 sugars? That's Dorothy. Right, what's yours? I thought about it. Just tea, I said. Plain is fine. I brought the cups down the hall. Eli was sitting cross-legged on the floor of Dorothy's room with the completed bookshelf standing behind him, looking pleased with himself in the way of someone who has mastered something that briefly had the upper hand. Dorothy was watching him with the expression she reserved for things that amused her and things she approved of, and lately those 2 categories had developed considerable overlap. I handed him his cup. He wrapped his hands around it and looked up at me. Good? He said. Good, I said. Outside, the last of the evening light was leaving Dorothy's window, the street below settling into its nighttime version of itself. Someone had turned on a lamp in the apartment across the way, and its warm light fell in a rectangle onto the pavement below, steady and certain, marking the place where it was. Dorothy sipped her tea. The shelf looks fine, she told Eli. It took 4 attempts. Most things worth doing do. She looked at the photograph of Walter and his brother and their one improbably celebrated fish. Then she looked at the street. Then she looked at us. Good, she said, in the tone she used when a thing was settled. That's good. 6 months later, Garrett accepted a plea agreement. He cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence and spent the following 2 years working to make partial restitution to his other investors. A list, it turned out, that was longer and more extensive than any of us had known. Oren sent Dorothy a Christmas card that December. She read it at the window seat and set it on the sill beside Walter's photograph, which I took to be its own kind of response. Braxley called on Sundays. We talked about small things. Sometimes the small things were enough. Irving Kellner retired in June, handed his files to a younger colleague named Sarah, and sent Dorothy a card with a brief note that made her laugh. Actually laugh out loud in a way that brought Eli in from the kitchen to see what had happened. She didn't share the contents. Some things are between a client and her attorney of 32 years, and that is as it should be. The tea from the shop 4 blocks away stopped being available when the shop closed in May. Dorothy assessed the situation for 3 days, identified a suitable alternative at a shop 8 blocks in the other direction, and announced her decision with the finality of a woman who has handled significantly more disruptive changes and is not particularly concerned. We were fine. Better than fine, actually. But fine is where it started, and I have stopped pretending that fine is a small thing. Fine means standing. Fine means something held. Fine means you came through. That's enough. That's more than enough. If this story found you today, if you listened all the way to the end, thank you. Thank you for staying with Ismiri and Dorothy, for sitting with the hard parts and the quiet parts and the parts where nothing dramatic happened but something real did. If this story reached you somewhere far from where it started, drop your city in the comments. I'd love to know how far it traveled, and if it meant something to you, if some part of it felt familiar, or true, or like something you needed to hear, please share it with someone else who might need it too. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this one. There are more to tell. Take care of the people who show up. Be the person who shows up. That's the whole thing, really. That's all of it.